Now let's move into the last part of this section. We're going to talk about query within query, an awesome feature of the product. What this allows us to do is to create a document with multiple queries, as we just learned in the previous chapter, but we're going to go a step further. As we define those multiple queries, instead of just merging them together, we're going to use one of those queries to provide the query filter values for another query. So it's kind of a different way of utilizing a query, but in a very effective way to allow us to do some very nice filtering conditions. And when we finish it out, we're going to have a small set of exercises. We're going to have an opportunity to see the advanced query filtering, including subquery, subquery any and all, query within query, as well as the object-to-object part of that. So the demo section will move throughout this as well. Now the results from another query works as follows. You run your query number 1. Down in the bottom of that, you're going to have a query filter section where you might have some values just selected, or there could be none. Okay? And you're going to add a second query in, and what you're going to do is point back to the first one. An alternative way to do that is to use what's called the subquery concept that we did earlier. But in reality, it turns out to be that this first way is actually better. It's a query within a query. So it makes it very nice for us and a very easy way to share filters without having to key them in multiple times. So now let's look at some examples. Okay, now we're going to show you a third feature called query within query. This is an awesome feature that was first introduced in version 3.1 of Webby and allows us to take a report with multiple queries and share the query filter conditions. Let me show you by virtue of an example. I'm going to give you some very good ideas on how you might want to think about using this. So we'll close out where we are to this point, create a new one for a universe. And the first one we're going to run is going to be against Island Resort. Okay? And we're going to create a simple report, and we're going to bring in for the customer, we'll bring in the customer, the region, and the city that they're in. City is what we're looking for. And maybe we'll bring in the number of guests. No big deal there. Okay? And what we're going to do is define the city. So we'll bring city down into the query filter window, standard object, operator, operand. And what we'll do is we'll click the down arrow from the right, and we're going to select the values from a list that we want. So on the left side, we're going to pick Chicago, and we'll pick Dallas, and we'll go down a little bit further, and we'll pick Houston, and we'll continue on down the line. We'll pick Los Angeles, and I'm not going to pick all the U.S. cities, but a few more. We'll pick San Francisco just in case. And I think that's going to be the last one that we pick from there. Okay, and we do an OK. So now I've limited to what I want to see. I run the query. And this is against the Island Resort, understand. And look, I only have those 4 that actually show up. Well, great, that was easy enough. We all know how to work with simple query filters and all. But now we're going to go to the Edit panel, Data Access Edit. And now we're going to add a second query from a universe. Okay, we just learned this in the previous chapter. We're going to pick eFashion this time. Hit the select button for that. Now query number 2 comes up. Let me expand this window out so I get rid of all that other stuff that's kind of clouding it a little bit. And for query number 2, which is going to be eFashion, we're going to go out there. We're going to grab the state and the city, and we'll just pick up a measure. We'll pick up margin, I guess, and quantity sold, just to pick up a couple measures. Margin and quantity sold. Okay, and I want to filter on city, so I bring city down into the window. And here's the problem. I want the same cities that I picked from the Island Resort in the earlier query that's within the same document. And notice on the bottom it says results from another query. Up until now, that's always remained grayed out. This will only become available when I start adding a second, third, or fourth query to a universe, to my query panel where I'm selecting from universes. But it was grayed out up until now. So we're going to do results from another query, and it brings up all the other queries within the single document. This feature only works within the single document. I can have, up to, as my one client with 50 of them. And literally within those 50, I could do the same feature, and they could be all pointing to all different queries to pick up the query filter conditions. So I have to tell it what to map it to, city. Now I know what some of you are saying, why doesn't it figure it out? When you start jumping between universes, a name doesn't necessarily mean that's what it represents. So is that really city or not? So we have to remind Webby that, oh, it's city from query number 1. Look how it qualifies it. City enlists the cities from query number 1. All right? So what it's going to do is look at query number 1, look at its filter values and bring those in. Let's run it and see what we get. It's going to ask to insert in a new report. The insert new report feature should not surprise us any. And there's report number 2. Look what it is. LA, San Francisco, Chicago, Dallas. Report number 1, Chicago, Dallas, Los Angeles, San Francisco. Now in report number 2, I didn't put any values in. I pointed it to number 1. That's all I did. And now it was able to share within. So think how powerful that is. Let me give you one little kind of step to the side example of it. I have some customers that use WebIRich Client, and what they use it for is to use this principle. What they'll do is they'll build an Excel spreadsheet column, single column, and it might be a list of patient IDs or customer IDs, and it might be a real long list, and they want to filter those. And what they want to do is they'll bring that in as the first data provider using WebIRich Client instead of just Webi. They'll add the second query from a universe, and they'll point to the Excel spreadsheet for the filter. They'll create a third query against a different universe, and they'll point to that as well. All they're doing is using that Excel feature so they can more quickly and easily build custom filtering conditions. What an awesome use. A reason that WebIRich Client has little extra bonuses in it as well. So that's something to think about as part of that same process. Now let's go back and edit the query. And what if I went back to the first query, which we're in, and I removed the filter, and I left query 2 as it is? What's going to happen here? Query number 2 is going to look at query number 1, and it's going to run against the entire set. And anything that matches from query 2 against number 1 against the entire answer set will be brought in. So let's see what that means. Let's run it. And when the output comes out, report number 2, look at report number 1. I got all the cities, every single one that exists. Every customer city, region, city combination came up all around the world, including U.S. cities. The only ones that matched from query number 2 were those 4. But remember, query number 1 did not specifically have a specific list of values. Because I didn't have any query filter, it assumed look at the entire answer set, all the cities that were brought in. And query number 2 found just those that matched between query number 2 and query number 1. Subtle little point, but a huge, very powerful feature of the product. The fact that I can bring in 5 or 6, 7 different sources. The first source can be the one that has the primary conditions that I want, and all the other ones can point to it. It's as simple as that. You do it by going back to the query panel here, and you saw how what we did for the second one. We picked city in list, and we clicked the down arrow. We said the results of another query. That's all you had to do to make that particular feature work in that scenario. There's no limit to how you can cross them over. Some guidelines and things that I've already kind of inferred, as you can see. It all has to be done within the same single document. You cannot span documents. You have to have at least 2 queries before it'll even show up. Let's assume you created 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 queries. They can all cross over with each other. Any combination of ways through the query filter combinations for filtering. Be careful not to get caught in some kind of a pseudo-recursive structure where they cross over with each other. That could create a problem there. I've never seen it, but it's possible. So we want to kind of keep it as simple as we can so we can follow the logic and make sure that we're pulling the data in. And don't forget my little tip on the WebIRich Client. The product's identical with the exception of the ability to bring in personal data files. Everything else is exactly the same. That may provide for some of you a very unique scenario where you could utilize that and really do some cool reporting and create dynamic filter lists. And people just never think about it, but it's a very, very good use. Now that we've completed that, let's move on to the hands-on section. We're going to get some experience in the advanced query workshop section. We're going to develop some advanced subqueries, and we'll be able to cover all the different areas, including object to object and the subquery any and subquery all.